Have you ever imagined what it would be like to wake up tomorrow and discover that the world as we know it has simply ended? I'm not talking about movies or TV shows. I'm talking about real stories from people who lived through the unthinkable. Because the truth is far more terrifying than any fiction, and what you're about to discover today will completely change how you see human nature. My name is Unsolved Secrets, and today we're diving into the most disturbing stories of apocalypse survivors. Stories that have been documented, recorded, and show humanity's darkest side when everything falls apart. But before we begin, answer me this. How far would you go to survive? Let me tell you something few people know. During the most catastrophic events in human history, devastating pandemics, total economic collapses, nuclear disasters, something always happens. Always. People don't just die from the tragedy itself. They die from what other people do afterward. And this leads us to the question nobody wants to ask. What are we really when the rules disappear? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share 3 documented stories that will show you what happens when civilization collapses. Stories recorded by survivors, by brave journalists, by people who witnessed the unthinkable. But I warn you, after hearing these stories, you'll never look at your neighbors the same way again. The first thing you need to understand about the apocalypse is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a process. First comes the event, what destroys our infrastructure, our communication, our sense of security. Then comes something much worse, what we do to each other. And that's where real stories become more terrifying than any horror movie. During the collapse of the Soviet Union, for example, entire cities were completely isolated for months. No food, no medicine, no law. What happened in these cities was documented in diaries and letters that only surfaced decades later. And what these people wrote will keep you awake at night. But that's just the beginning. Because when hunger arrives, when desperation takes over, we discover what we're truly capable of. In Pripyat, after the Chernobyl disaster, the first responders didn't know about the radiation. They entered the forbidden zone and found not only the silent death of radiation, but something even more disturbing. Groups of survivors who had completely lost their humanity. And what they did to survive, well, you'll only find out if you keep watching. The psychology of the apocalypse is fascinating and terrible. Studies show that in extreme situations, only 10% of people maintain their moral integrity. The other 90%, they transform into something we no longer recognize as human. And now, I'm going to tell you exactly how this happens. The shelter dilemma. During the winter of 1991, in the Siberian city of Norilsk, a chemical leak contaminated the entire water supply. The city was completely isolated for 8 months. Survivors divided into groups, each controlling one building. What happened in Building 47 was documented by a nurse named Katya, and her words will haunt you. Katya wrote in her diary, "At first we were 200 people in the building. We shared everything. But when food started running out, Victor suggested something unthinkable. He said the wounded and sick were consuming too many resources. The decision they made was documented not only by Katya, but by 3 other survivors. They voted democratically and decided to abandon the weakest in the cold. But that was just the beginning, because 3 weeks later, when the situation got even worse, Victor wasn't talking about abandoning anyone anymore. Katya continued writing. He was talking about other solutions. And the worst part, everyone was agreeing, including me. What happened in the following weeks in Norilsk proved that humanity's greatest predator is humanity itself, the farm of the forgotten. In 1986, after the Chernobyl accident, a farming family refused evacuation. The Petrovs thought they could wait for the radiation to decrease. They had supplies for months and an underground shelter. What they didn't expect was a visit from other survivors. Ivan Petrov's diary, found years later, states, "3 families arrived at our farm, said they were just passing through. We offered food, shelter. It was our biggest mistake." These families weren't fleeing radiation, they were hunting other families, other supplies, other opportunities, and the Petrovs discovered this in the worst possible way. What happened on that farm during 6 months without contact with the outside world was reconstructed through physical evidence and Ivan's diary, and it's more disturbing than any horror movie. Ivan writes, "They don't just want our food, they want our shelter, our tools, our dignity. And I discovered today that my own wife is planning something with them. I don't trust anyone anymore, not even myself." The last pages of Ivan's diary show how paranoia and fear transformed a united family into violent strangers living under the same roof. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found evidence of what really happened in the farm's basement, the last train. During the collapse of Yugoslavia in 1992, an evacuation train got trapped for 12 days in a collapsed tunnel in the mountains. 150 passengers, including children, elderly people, and war wounded. What happened on that train was documented by a journalist who was aboard, and his story will completely change your perspective on human nature. Marko Jovanovic, the journalist, managed to hide his notes throughout the ordeal. His words, "On the first day we were a community, on the third day we were tribes, on the 7th day we were animals." The division started simple: who had food and who didn't. Then it evolved to who was strong and who was weak. Finally, it reached the darkest point: who deserved to live and who didn't. And what Marko witnessed on the 10th day will make you question everything you believe about civilization. A mother offered her own wounded son as tribute to ensure she and her healthy daughter would receive water, Marko wrote. And the most terrible thing? We all considered it reasonable. When rescue finally arrived, they found 89 survivors, but according to Marko, only 15 were still recognizable as the people who entered the train. The official report was never released, but Marko's notes reveal exactly why. These stories I just told aren't fiction. They were documented, verified, archived, and they show us a disturbing truth. Civilization is much more fragile than we think. But the question that remains is, what about you? What would you do in these situations? The psychology of the apocalypse teaches us that we all have a breaking point, a moment where our morals, our ethics, our humanity simply disappear. And the scariest part is, we never know where that point is until we reach it. And maybe that's for the best, because knowing our own limits might be more terrifying than any apocalypse. These stories continue happening today, in war zones, in natural disasters, in economic collapses. With each tragedy, we discover again what we're capable of when everything falls apart. And if you want to know more real stories like these, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell, because next week I'm going to tell the most disturbing story of all. What happened when an entire city simply disappeared? And let me know in the comments, how far do you think you'd go to protect those you love? Because after hearing these stories, I'm sure your answer will be different. Until next time, if there is a next time.